our invitation to be our keynote speaker at the Division of Marketing.
My pleasure.
You were with us at the doctoral program last year at the same conference, but now you are you're opening to a broad audience, and it's it's our honor to have you here. I'll just spend a little 1 minute presenting you for the audience, and after that you can start. We are doing something like Professor Emilio will moderate all the discussion with the group. They are putting all the questions that they have on the web, on the chat, and Emilio will probably translate to you or have some other arrangements to have you for the response to the answers. Okay.
Okay.
So
I've got, let me bounce something off of you. I've got like 2 stopping points in the presentation that I could stop and take some questions, or would you rather me just go through the whole thing until the end? It's going to get kind of dry. I was thinking if I go through all the way to the end. So if we stop for a couple.
Yeah, could be.
You can choose.
Up to you.
Let's do that. Yeah. I think they'll like that better and make it a little bit more engaging versus just sitting watching me for however long it takes for me to get through the deck.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. So
one other thing I wanted to ask.
Oh, sorry.
I've got I uploaded some videos that we made for the EMAC doctoral author development workshop, and that people seem to like. Before editors divided up how to craft a manuscript, and so I've got those set up on a box link that people can just click and watch the video, but I need somehow for them to get access to that link. Could I send that to you and you could send it to people? Or?
Yeah, perfect. Okay. You can put on the chat. I can. They all see that.
Oh, that's great. Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
All right. The problem is I'm presenting. It's hard to put it in the tape. Do it in the chat.
Okay.
Let me. Okay, I'll see if I should be able to do that at the end.
Okay, perfect.
You can share anything you need in the chat, and if you want to share your video simultaneously, people see, you can also do that with the shared screen.
I could do that. It's in mine. They're between all 4 of them. They're about 40 minutes. So no, I don't want to have people watch a video. But if they want to, I thought it'd be good and be of interest to some of the people in the audience. So
so you can send by chat to them.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I'll just put it in the chat. Great.
Okay. Or if you want to send me my email, I can put in the chat after that. So no problem.
Okay. Now, while you're introducing me, I'll be finding that link and I'll.
Okay.
So,
perfect.
Once I start talking, I'm talking for like an hour and 40 minutes. So,
okay.
It'd be hard to be inserting stuff in the chat. Okay, great.
Okay. So thank you. So again, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to be here. Professor Jeffery Inman is professor at the Albert Wesley Frey Professor of Marketing and Associate Dean of Research and Faculty at Katz Graduate School of Business at the University of Pittsburgh. He's currently the editor-in-chief of Journal Consumer Research. He's also a past president of the Society for Consumer Psychology, and is the former president of the Association for Consumer Psychology. His research focuses on consumer relevant issues such as factors that increases healthy eating, in-stock choice, and the influence of technology on consumer behavior. He has published over 50 journal articles across a variety of journals, including Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Market Research, Marketing Science, and Journal of Marketing. He has won MSI Age Pro Root, which awarded to a Journal of Marketing article based on its contribution to advancement of the practice of marketing. And also he has over 12,000 citations according to Google Scholar. So it's very important. We are very honored to have you here, and thank you very much. So please, Professor Jeffery.
Thanks, Paulo. Thanks, Emilio. Okay, I will share my screen. I went ahead and inserted into the chat a link I'll be referencing like around the last slide of this deck in about an hour and a half. But I put it in there now because I'm going to be busy presenting and answering questions for the rest of today's session. Let's see, let me get this started now. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, let me get
Yes, okay, you can.
wait a minute, let me put it into presentation mode. There we go.
Dash mode, yeah. Good.
They're good? Okay. Yeah, it's a real honor to be asked to share some thoughts on the trends and challenges that are underway, fast and furious actually, in the field of consumer research, and actually more broadly at least in the field of marketing scholarship. A lot of the things I'll talk about today will apply across at least JMR, JM, JCP, JAMS, IJRM, any journals like of that nature. But specifically at JCR. So JCR is the thing I know the most about right now. So I'll stick with what I know and not try to make overgeneralization claims to other journals. So let's move right along. I've divided this up into 3 blocks roughly, and so we'll stop at the end of each block and take some questions. So as they come to mind today, just go ahead and type your questions into the chat, and hopefully Emilio can curate some of those, and then we'll address those at the breaks. Okay, so for those of you who don't know about the Journal of Consumer Research, the Journal of Consumer Research is probably broader than most people think. It's really, the focus has always been this since it started in 1974, to be an interdisciplinary journal, that it really advances what we know about all things consumers and their consumption behaviors. And so we try to focus on publishing work that focuses on consumer relevant problems and addresses, like I said, the broad consumer behavior in the broadest sense, from acquisition to consumption to disposal, and then contributes to conversations across disciplines. And I think we've been, our team really focused on that first one. We really felt we needed to push on JCR to the community to really look more at consumer relevant problems. And so when we first started our term, which was in January of 2018, we got a little bit of pushback and a little bit of questions as to, well, what do you mean by consumer relevant? So we we don't get those questions anymore. And at the beginning of our term, we had to bring that up when people would some of the manuscripts. We'd have to challenge, push the authors to make that make it clearly consumer relevant. And now really we don't get many papers that are in question anymore. And when we do, it's really the reviewers and the AEs that are bringing it up. So I haven't had to be the one that brings that up for probably the last 2 years. So I think the field is on board with that. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback on that. I guess those who disagree are hoping the new team is different. They start on January 1st, but from what I've heard from talking to them, they're going to be the same as we are. So the team of JCR, this is similar to other journals in our field. It's gotten bigger and bigger. When I first started, there was one editor, and there were weren't any associate editors, and there was a handful of editorial board members at all the journals. And now it's this community basically. So JCR has 4 editors. The new team has 5 editors. We have 40 associate editors, and 170, 180. It's fluctuated during our term. Editorial board members, and a whole bunch of people that we invite to be ad hoc reviewers, and depending on the fit with the manuscript. If you're interested in becoming an ad hoc reviewer, you should go into our Manuscript Central, the Scholar One system. You can access it through the JCR website and just register. And you have to click indicate a bunch of specialty codes and expertise codes. And then when we need an ad hoc reviewer, the editor does a search, and we might request that you do a review for us. In terms of how the manuscripts flow at JCR, I think that's a good thing to kind of understand if you don't understand that right now. It comes, and all the journals seem to work like this these days. The manuscripts all flow to one person, and that person's me at JCR. And then I take those and I assign 75% of them across the other 3 co-editors, and I keep about 25% for myself. And then from then on, that editor handles the manuscript. So that editor assigns the associate editor. That editor assigns the review team, and then manages the decision on the paper. So really I touch them all, but then once they get assigned to an editor, that editor handles the disposition of that manuscript. So here are the editors, the 4 editors. I'm at Pitt, and then Amna is at Maryland, and Meg is at Colorado. Linda was at Oregon when we started, but times change, and so now Linda has moved to Wyoming. But she lives in Colorado, so go figure that. She lives in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I guess I didn't understand geography in the U.S. as well as I thought I did. The University of Wyoming's about an hour drive or less from Fort Collins, Colorado. So here's at least you'll learn something from this presentation today. This is what we look like now. That was what we looked like before. Every week we get together and have a Skype call. And this is what I see every week for at least an hour and a half. So it's great. We get together and we collaborate, we coordinate. I think that's good, because one of the challenges that Journal has in having kind of 4 head chefs, I guess you could call it, is each one guy that does its own, each person does their own thing, and you get heterogeneity. And so we try to manage that so that as an author, it doesn't really matter if you get me or Meg or Linda or Amna, you're going to get the same experience and the same sense of where the bar is for giving revisions, which is important to authors, obviously. Here's a list of the associate editors. Obviously, I'm not going to read these 40 names, but the main point in here is that it's a global community. These people are from around the world, so that's good. JCR, back to the breadth of JCR. JCR is run by 11 different organizations. Although they really don't get any money from JCR, it's incorporated separately. It's very confusing. But anyway, you can see these organizations are not all your classic consumer behavior sorts of organizations. There's some, like obviously ACR and the Society for Consumer Psychology, but then you have some and then anthropology, which is more for the CCT community, and the American Sociological Association. But you've also got some, managerial organizations, which would be like AMA, and then we have Informs. So it's a pretty broad umbrella that we work under at JCR. In terms of some stats, just to give you a sense of where what your chances are, so you calibrate it when you submit a manuscript. JCR is a very high impact journal, so it's makes it a desirable journal to publish in. And in fact, last year was our highest impact factor we've ever had at the journal. So it was over 6. And just to give you a sense of where that fits in terms of other Financial Times journals that you may, the folks on this call may target with their papers. We're second to JAMS. We're ahead of JM and JMR in marketing science, and you're way ahead of JCP and OBHDP. So it's a high impact journal, but all the others are pretty good too. And overall, if you look at all the journals that are indexed in the business category, we're 13th out of 100, so in the top 10%. So that's pretty good. So here's how the manuscript split out in terms of our decisions, and you can see the date of this report I ran was the 1st of January 2018 when we started through the 1st of this month. And so far we've had over 2,000 manuscripts we've made decisions on. There's still a couple, 200 or 300 in process. And you can see it splits out about a third desk reject and about a third reject, and then about a third, so 2/3 bad news and 1/3 good news is the way I would characterize it as an author. And the papers that get desk rejected, so I've seen this sort of a never done so well as I did it here in this particular slide, but I've seen these stats over the years that they meet the editors meetings, and I've always thought, boy, these editors are tough. They're desk rejecting like 30, 40. I've seen journals reject 50% of their manuscripts. 60%. And I thought, but these guys are really tough. But being in the editor's shoes now, I see that there's just so many submissions that we get that really just didn't look at the journal at all before they, hit the send button to submit their manuscript. They're just really not a good fit. Some of them are like, when I open the journal, when I open the article or the submission to the manuscript and it's 12 pages long, I know that that's probably not going to be one that's going to get sent out for review. So, I mean, the folks on this call, I think, are going to be better calibrated than that. So I wouldn't think that I think your chances of getting desk rejected would be much lower. Now, having said that, sometimes this is where the calibration and come into these kinds of sessions is useful. Let's say you submit something to JCR or JM or JMR, happens there too, and you get a desk reject. And so what that means is that it doesn't mean you're forever banned from sending that paper back, but we try, at least we do, we try to give some feedback. It's like, well, here's what, here's the problem. This is why your paper got desk rejected. And we don't, and implicitly, what that means is if you take that to heart and fix those things that you got feedback on, then try it again. I mean, there's no penalty for, resubmitting. JM, JMR, marketing science, wherever, if you've got a desk reject, you can try to fix those issues that the editor had trouble with and then give it another shot. Most people don't know that. And I'm saying it here toward the end of our term so we don't get submissions. But no, it's true. We don't get many that come back. And I think it's because so many, they're just shopping the paper. Now, this is another slide. This is the, this is over the last year. And I broke it out. This and the next slide. So this slide is for just new papers that are coming through the door versus revisions. And so what you can see is if, at least over the last year, and I think this reflects, pretty reflective of our whole term, is that the desk reject rate is about 50%. And like I said, these papers just don't fit. And then the revision rate is 16%. And so you look at this and you think, wow, I've only got a 16% chance of getting a revision. The way I look at it is that, if you've done a good job of reading the journal and getting a sense of what they're looking for, you're not going to be in that desk reject group. You're going to be at least sent out for review. And if you get, and so conditional on getting sent out, your paper sent out for review, you got about a 33% chance of getting a revision, which is much higher than I think we would have guessed, people on this call would have guessed. And I don't think JCR is an outlier there. So, I mean, it's our bottom line acceptance rate is running about 8 or 9%. But if you factor out all the desk rejects, it's way higher than that. So, and that's true at any journals. They put in all those desk rejects. They put in the revisions when they come back. So a paper comes back for 3 rounds, it's in the denominator 3 times. So those acceptance rates you see published by journals, and they all do this, are artificially lower, because in reality, it should just be of all papers, not the same one 5 times, because under the revisions, just of all new papers, what are my chances of getting accepted? That's what people think that means, and that's not what it means. So just wanted to clarify that. That's something I learned as an editor that I wish I had known as an author. So I'd have a better sense of what my chances were. And so then in terms of what happens if your paper's already received a revision invitation, you can see good things happen if your paper gets a revision, at least under our team. Only 12% of the revisions get rejected. Everything else either gets accepted or as another round. So, and we looked at this the other day. We got a question, how many rounds are papers going under us? And the problem is we inherited a bunch of stuff from the old system. And so it's hard to know what came to us, but at least I looked at my papers, and the ones I've done, they're running about between 3 and 4 rounds to final acceptance. So that means what? 2 revisions, between 2 and 3 revisions, and the 3rd when you're cleaning stuff up. So, we try not to, make people revise their paper to death. We want to get the papers in, get them accepted, and get them published. So recent trends we're seeing. So I'll start off with the good, but then there's more bad than good, I think, in terms of just the impact we've seen on the journal over the last year at least. So the good is that JCR has a really strong reputation in the field of marketing and consumer research. And we got a great editorial board and set of AEs who really have helped us implement our vision for consumer relevant research. And we've worked hard on improving some of the JCR processes. Us, along with in conjunction with that policy board I showed you earlier. So the challenges, a couple challenges we faced over the last year, and everybody's facing these challenges. You know, COVID has been a real problem. I mean, I thought today about wearing my PIT mask that they issued us, but I figured I'd be okay since I'm presenting from my house. But I'm sure you all have, you know, we have masks laying all over the house, and then our 2 or 3 in the car. We have mass proliferation problems at our household right now. And it's affecting, I hope it hasn't infected, it's affected the entire JCR community and the entire academic community, the entire world. I mean, in many, many, many ways, as you all are painfully aware. And what that's done to JCR it's lengthened our turnaround times a bit. Because we've had, you know, the turnaround time for a paper is only so fast as the weakest link in the chain. And so we've had reviewers and AEs that have had some, you know, major childcare issues, some, you know, having to flip in March to teaching on Zoom right in the middle of the semester. I mean, it really has slowed things down. And I'd guess by maybe at least 2 weeks, probably on average, maybe 2 to 3 weeks on average. It's still pretty fast. Our turnaround time's like 60, 65 days. So it's still pretty fast. When I started, it was about 90 days. On the other hand, COVID and the accompanying economic turmoil it's created from the shutdowns has really raised some really important and interesting opportunities for research about the effect of external threats on consumer behavior. And so we're seeing journals, you know, have these pop-up issues. I think JACR is doing one. I think JCP announced one on, you know, the effects of COVID on consumers. And we're starting to get some submissions on that. So, you know, people are really out, you know, already working real hard on that. As it turned out, JCR we had a handful of papers that were either about health threats or economic threats. And so we decided we would put together an issue, what we call a focused issue, because it really wasn't a special issue, because it just turned out that we had a corpus of papers that fit this perfectly. And so if you've noticed, we've focused or devoted the October issue to consumer response to threats. And so there's a lead-off article that our team wrote that presents a framework, and then you can see through this list of titles that about half of the articles in this issue this month are about health threats, and the other half are about consumer response to economic or financial threats. So it's hopefully it'll help kind of move along and organize the bulge in research that's underway on both these topics. Okay, so one of the other challenge we've had to deal with, I don't know if any of you've noticed, but we've had some research integrity issues. And I'm not going to get into, I can't really get into the details. I mean, if I could, but it'd take several hours to talk our way through it. But let's just leave it said that we've had some retractions. Some of you have probably noticed those that have come out. It's really changed my way of thinking. I was a bit of a Pollyanna when I came in 3 years ago, and now I have more of a sense that we need to have, we need to have a response to this. And it's not just me, our whole team felt that, and the policy board did as well. So the JCR policy board has updated our research integrity and transparency and ethics guidelines. So if you submit something to JCR, make sure you look at those, because those have changed a bit. Not in a super draconian way, but it's changed. And the biggest change I would say as an author is now you have to submit your data when you submit to JCR. And used to be you would just submit that you would archive your data somewhere in case there was a problem for 5 years, and it's not like anybody can click on it and get your data. That's still the case. So you just have to submit it. So if there's a question, the reviewers and the editors can look at it. Not like we have a lot of time on our hands to do that, but that's probably the biggest change. And moving forward, I really don't feel that that's enough, because it's just too much to ask the reviewers and the A's to police all the statistics and whatnot and the data integrity. So our team's recommended that the policy board form a task force. And the general community doesn't know this, by the way, so you're the first ones to hear this, that we really need to look at other options. And I think it just needs to be a real close look at accepted papers. You know, I don't think we need to drag every paper through this, but we really need to take a closer look at all the accepted papers, because those are the ones that are going to come out and get scrutinized by the broader academic community. So they really have to, you know, make sure they pass muster. And we also have if you're interested in consumer relations with brands, we have a future brands special issue that's coming out in next year, next August. At least that's the plan. So we've got 17 revisions invited for that, and we're hopeful we'll be able to stay on track to get that the issue wrapped up by May of next year, to be published in August. Okay, so we've had some questions around, we haven't had any questions. There's some confusion about the transition to the new team. So our team is handling all the new submissions through the end of this year. We've already started to get, like in April, because they picked the new editors in March for some reason. And so we started to get submissions in April saying, you know, dear Professor Schmidt and team, you know, I'd like to submit my paper for consideration, you know. And so, well, I think you probably want us to handle it rather than have to wait till January 1st, 2021. So anyway, that's what's going to happen. We're taking all new manuscripts through the end of this year, and then we're going to handle all revisions that are submitted by the end of March. And we're also going to stick around and wrap up that special issue on the future of brands. So at this point, I've got, I'm going to shift to it's a transition to kind of the shifting sands, I call this, of experimental research. But before we do that, I'm going to take a second and answer. Are there any questions that have come in?
If anybody has any question, you can put in this chat. I'd like to know, Professor Inman, if you have some information about submissions from Brazil, if you have some idea about the countries that submit articles to JCR, you have some kind of
you know, that's a really good question. We don't keep track of that. We've had questions lately with all the, you know, the social unrest and social justice issues about you know, what some of our submissions are from authors of color or from women, and we just don't have any of that in the submission process. So I really don't have the answer to that, but I do know that we, just from handling all the submissions, we do get some from South America and from Brazil in particular, but not a whole lot. We do get some, but it's not a very big number. It's mostly, you know, the lion's share, frankly, is North America, and there's some Europe, and there's some China, and then it's
Australia, maybe.
Some from Australia, there's some from Australia. Yeah, that's another.
Okay, yeah, because I'm concerned about if our problem about submission to JCR is more concerning about the relevance or more concerned about the language skills. I know that we are following our marketing division and see that many professors here in Brazil are getting some good supervision from JAMS and Journal of Consumer Psychology, Journal of Marketing. Also, we have a professor in our marketing division, but it's just few professors that have this kind of impact. And we don't know recently if anyone have published in JCR, but we try to understand what we have to introduce to our research, some kind of idea to how to improve the quality of their manuscripts to guarantee success in the end of the research.
Well, that's a really good question. I would say if based on just what you've told me about having some success and getting traction at JAMS and JM, that sounds like it's a function of the kind of research that was being done that's maybe more firm focused research, like financial value, impact of marketing sorts of things. But I don't, because they value, you know, communication there too. So communication is always important, no matter where you're targeting your submissions. So I don't think it's necessarily, you know, the JCR is pickier on communication than anybody else. So I don't know.
Okay.
One thing I will say though is if that's of interest, then crafting manuscripts, take a look at that link. Everybody that's on here, that, you know, should take a look at that link that I sent, because I uploaded those. I just had that idea today because we had put those. We'd put together. I'll talk about it now. So we had put together I mentioned it earlier already, a set of videos. We've had these author development workshops that we've done around the world. We were supposed to do one in Australia this December, but that got canceled. But we did one for EMAC this last summer, so in July. And as part of that, since it was all going to be distance, we put together videos and we carved up the lecture, I guess, material that we had used in these author development workshops when we had done them in the past. We made videos of them. And so I've put those, I was thinking about that today as I was going over the slides. I thought, well, that'd be of interest maybe to some people watching this video today, watching the discussion today. So I put those in a box account. And so you just click on that URL I sent and that link, and you should be able to view all those videos.
Good. It's a good support that can help to address what people are doing. I have a question here from Professor Cristiane Pizzuti from the south of Brazil, and not about JCR in particular. We know that multi-method research brings many benefits, and some editors talk about its relevance, but it is also challenging because it could leave each study undeveloped. So how to deal with this issue?
How to deal with what was the issue? I didn't catch what the problem is with multi-method.
About the challenge because it's not well developed in the multi-method process.
Oh, yeah, okay. That's a great question, because in the next part of this talk, you're going to see multi-method mentioned like 5 times. And I agree with that question. I've been doing or trying to do multi-method research for a big chunk of my career, and I have found that when you do multi-method, this is like back in the 90s when I was getting started, you'd send it in, and then they send it out for review. And let's say if you've got a mix of maybe you've got a secondary data set from a company that you've analyzed, and then you've got maybe an experiment or a survey and what have you. So then the reviewers, they send it out to somebody who can critique the regressions and stuff you did on the archival data, and then they send it out to somebody who can critique the experiments, and then the experimentalist says, okay, these experiments may have some value, but get rid of that secondary data set. And then the more quantitative person will say just the opposite. And then the review editor's like, I don't know, and then they reject it, which is annoying. So, but now, being an editor, I'm in a position to say, no, we need multi-method research, because my sense is that multi-method research brings a lot of power, because if you're going to do multiple studies, why do the same experiment 3 times and basically just vary a little bit of it and then claim you've demonstrated robustness? You haven't really demonstrated robustness because you haven't changed the paradigm very much, and B, you certainly haven't demonstrated anything with external validity and generalizability of the findings. So multi-method research really brings that to the table, and it really is strong in terms of demonstrating external validity and internal validity. And what's interesting is that and I've seen this, I don't know if anybody on this call goes to the Marketing Science Conference, the same shift is happening there. So the reason the consumer behavior folks are interested in multi-method papers these days, or more of them are, and more of them should be, is because of what I just said about balancing the, getting that external validity by having a data set. And if you look at some of the work that Stephanie Tully's done, she was at Southern California, now she's at Stanford, and there's others, they've really done a good job of, look at them with some of their papers, Isha Sharma, where they've got it. They've got this method where they've, this formula, I guess you could say, where they put together these multi-method papers. Now, on the other side, the modeling people, they are also interested in multi-method, but for a different reason. So if you're a modeler and you try to submit something that's archival data, the reviewers say, well, what about endogeneity? That's how you can't make causal claims because you have endogeneity. And so that's pushed that community to add experiments to some of their papers. And the interesting thing is they're really terrible at doing experiments. I know, because I'm not great at either, I guess, but I've done both. And I think there's an opportunity here for more, and we're starting to see some of that at JCR. Not very much though, just a little bit, where you've got CB people combining with more modeling people to do these multi-method papers. So I think that's an opportunity, because a lot of departments in business schools have a mix. And so I think there's an opportunity there. So you touched a hot button with me with asking about the multi-method research. The new team is really interested in multi-method research as well, by the way. So, and JM, I even heard them mention it at a Meet the Editors session. So it seems like the wheel is turning toward, or just a better metaphor, the pendulum is swinging more toward multi-method work these days. So that's good.
Good. Professor Cristiani, just thank you. And I have one more question here. Do you think that articles with all stories with data from online panels will be well received from now after COVID-19 and all restrictions for field studies?
Oh, you mean papers with just all online panelists, like MTurk, academic, prolific academic? Yeah, I mean, our team really has frowned upon papers that have all MTurk or all prolific academic based samples. But we got to face it, we're in an environment where you can't do lab studies, and you can't do, or it's challenging to do field studies. So we just have to be receptive to that, and we will be, but I'd say that's a temporary thing. I mean, I had heard rumors, which are not true, that's also in the talk later on, that JCR doesn't like all MTurk papers. And maybe that's where that question's coming from. I'd say we're not real super fans of all MTurk papers. That was before COVID, but now we just have to be realistic. I mean, that just, people can't do lab studies and they can't do field studies. So, so that's fine. So sure, go ahead and send those in. One thing I will say though, I'm glad it came up, because I probably would have forgotten to say it if it's just on a slide, is I've had a couple of instances where people have done these online studies, MTurk studies, and I had one that they were doing a willingness to pay, and they did the typical, how much you're willing to pay for this coffee mug sort of thing, and people just, write in a number. But then I pushed them to try to run an incentive compatible willingness to pay study, where they used that Becker, Marshak, and de Groot approach. That there's a nice paper by Werdenbrock and Sciarra, I think JMR 2004 or something like that, that really talks about how to do willingness to pay in an incentive compatible design. And these guys did this in MTurk, and it actually worked. So, I mean, not everybody's doing willingness to pay, but I'm just saying, I guess my point is, just because you're doing MTurk doesn't mean you can't have an incentive compatible design. And so it's really more the need for consequential data and incentive compatible designs that we're more interested in, not anti-MTurk at all. Okay. Does that answer that question? I think.
Yep. I think that's very clear. Okay, I think that for now it's people already finished. I don't know if Paulo wants to say something or you want to wait, but it's okay. You can continue, Professor. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Well, that's good. So those are really good questions. So here's some trends, more trends that are happening in experimental research. So if you're on this call, I'm assuming you're interested in experimental research. Although if you're interested in CCT and qualitative research, I'm not really going to get into that in terms of this, because that's one of Linda Price's bailiwick. And definitely watch her video because she really walks through how to do that. So a couple general trends that we're seeing, and I broke them into two. One's in experimental design, and the other one is more like a meta, kind of an overarching approach to overarching issues with experimentation and all things experimentation. So experimental design. So one topic that's coming up more and more we're seeing is pre-registration. So I'll talk about our current position at JCR and where I think things are headed. We do not require that studies be pre-registered. We just don't. I mean, my sense is there's ways to, if you're thinking that's going to stop people from gaming things, that's not going to solve it, because people can still run the study enough times until they know they're going to get the effect, and then you pre-register. And so it's not a panacea for research integrity. So that's our current position. We are seeing more studies being pre-registered, and we are seeing more reviewers and even AEs suggesting that studies be pre-registered. So I think the trend is going to be that at some point, JCR and JCP at least one of those two may require pre-registration for all experiments. But that's not where we're at as a team, and we're almost done now. So the new team, I don't think has any intentions to do that either, but I think it is heading that direction. So that's pre-registration. So sample size, another trend. So it's amazing. When I teach my doctoral seminar, I look back just at papers that are like 3 or 4 or 5 years old, and I look at the sample sizes, and I'm like, oh my God, that would never make it through the process today. And so where are we right now? Where we're at, our team has been at, is that, if number one, if you really want to have a certain sample size, then run a power analysis and justify your sample size. That would be my main advice. And very, very few people, very, very few authors do that. We rarely see a power analysis. I mean, maybe 1 in 20, 1 in 50 papers does that. So I think that would be a good thing to do. But the rules of thumb, at least we've used, are 30 people per cell for a lab study or a field study, and 50 per cell for MTurk. And now that MTurk number is getting higher. So I'd say, some people are out there calling for 100 people per cell on MTurk. I think that privileges people, at least our team's take has been that, standards like that, if there were standards like that, privilege people from big universities that have big research budgets. And so we, as a team, have not gone there. But you do expect more. We do expect a bigger sample on MTurk. So if I see less than 50 per cell, I get a little nervous on MTurk. But I'm seeing some reviewers and some AEs acting like they're nervous when it's below 100, which I think is, wrong, but that seems to be the trend. So just FYI on sample size. Okay, now this is the order of the manipulation check versus the DV. So I've screwed up here. I've got M coming later, and it's going to be the mediator. But the best best way to do it, well, actually M is the mediator. So the best way to counterbalance this thing is, the best is to counterbalance. So take half the sample and measure the mediator first, and then the DV, and the other half the other way around, and hopefully order doesn't matter. But most people don't want to take the chance on that happening. To have an order will matter. So the current best practice is to measure the DV before the mediator. Although I've seen, so sometimes it comes up in the process. Most people do it that way. They measure the DV first, then they measure their mediator. And same thing with a manipulation check. The manipulation check, you know, almost always it better come after the DV, or the reviewers are going to raise issues with it. And unless you can make a case that the DV basically eliminates the effects of the manipulation. And sometimes I've had papers where that happens. So you have to make a good case, make a strong case. So just prepare for that to come up and justify the order that you did your measures. Would be my advice. More experimental design. So measured mediation. So I'm having self-reported mediator and a self-reported dependent variable. Like what's the self-report would be like purchase intention or something of that nature, or attitude toward a brand or something like that. And so a question that's going to come up is, how close is that mediator to the DV? I mean, are they really close together conceptually? And this is coming from that Peters article that appeared in JCR, I think in 2017. So we're seeing more and more of our reviewers raising that as an issue. And so the best way to refute that or test that would be to factor analyze your measures you took for your, or there's two ways. One is to do a factor analysis of your mediator measures and your DV measures and show that they load on two different factors. That would be some convincing evidence. Even more effective is to have a behavioral dependent variable where they're like going to click and watch an ad, willingness to do that, or they're going to click and watch an ad, or they're going to click through something, or they're going to choose something. Then you've got, they're not just two self-reports. So when you've got self-reports and you're running a risk that you're going to have this common method issue that's going to cause the mediator and the DV to load on the same factor, and that'll be a problem. And another trend we're seeing is process by moderation instead of a mediation analysis. We still see some mediation analyses, but not as much as when we first started. That used to be that was the gold standard. You have to have a mediation analysis. We still see a lot of those, and that's fine. But we're seeing more and more papers where there are studies in there that have process by moderation, where you manipulate the moderator or even manipulate the mediator, because they talk about that in that article of theirs in JPSP. We're seeing more of that. I think reviewers really like to, they tend to like to see a study like that, because it does two things. One is it gets rid of this common method problem, at least a little bit, to a great extent actually. And secondly, it increases the contribution, because now I've got a moderator in there that's demonstrated a boundary effect. So that's never a bad thing at JCR. One thing I'll say, these moderators is the reviewers, and probably JM and JMR and JCP too, they like to see, they don't like to see moderators who just come out of the blue. And they like to see they had some reason. They're called conceptually, you heard the term conceptually related moderator. Now you just have to make the case that it's conceptually related, and then the reviewers and the AE and the editor will judge for themselves. But it might be good to just say, yeah, we chose this because it's a conceptually related moderator, and having said it might go a ways towards convincing the reviewers that it is a conceptually related moderator. So types of dependent variables, I already talked about this a little bit. Self-reports, intentions, attitudes. You can have, JCR has, typically JCR will have several studies in it. And some of them can be self-reported DVs. They don't all have to be actual behavior, but it's best to have at least, I would say if it was me, I would try to have at least 2 behavior DV studies in my paper. And the behavior I'm talking about doesn't have to be choice. It can be other things. It can be, they had to write a review. So you're doing something on online, on online word of mouth. You expose them to your independent variables, have them write a review. And then you do sentiment analysis on it. that doesn't work for everybody, obviously, but you need to think creatively. I really encourage the authors to think creatively about ways to have a dependent variable that isn't just self-report. I mean, at least in 2 studies, that really will help your chances of your paper. And then finally, you'd be surprised how often this comes up, ecological validity or lack thereof. So even if it is an online experiment, I mean, having it just be some, scenarios where people read something and then react to it. I mean, I've had papers like that, but they were a while ago, and now it seems that those are harder to get through. You can have scenario-based studies in there, but that's fine, but they need to be more ecologically valid. I mean, so it's got to have some brands in there. I mean, it's just got to be, it's something the reviewers will say, okay, yeah, this is something that seemed realistic to the participant. It wasn't just them, reading something and going along with it. So that comes up more often than I would like. Doesn't come up that often, but when it does, that's a real problem. And finally, external validity. We've touched on external validity. External validity is great because it really goes a long way towards demonstrating generalizability and robustness of the findings. If you can find your core effect in the real world, so to speak, that's pretty compelling. And then we've heard rumors that every paper has to have a field experiment. Well, that's not true. I think that I don't know where that came from. I think field experiments are good. They don't always fit every paper or every research project. If you've got a field experiment, that's great, but that's always been great. I mean, I did field study for my dissertation. I mean, so it's been around a while. We just, as a field like that, because it's real world, people are actually coming in and being exposed to interventions and manipulations, and you're seeing your effects obtain in a real world setting. That is amazingly compelling with reviewers. And it really is convincing that, yeah, there's something really there and it really works. It's not like I'm having to, contrive some paradigm to get the effect to come out. So yeah, field experiments are a plus, they're not a must. So now let's step back at a little higher level and some kind of meta experiment issues. So one is the single paper meta-analysis. And JCR published this paper, tutorial on single paper meta-analysis. Actually, I think it was Rothschild I was doing this back in the 90s with Priya Raghavir in a couple papers. So it's been around a long time. And it's a bit of a mixed bag. And so some authors have embraced that and really tried to use that. There's been a fair amount of pushback and criticism to it from I call them the data police community. And I think they have a point in this case, at least, that if you're going to pool your studies, it's assuming that we're pooling all the studies that we ran, not just the ones that happened to come out, and there wasn't any p-hacking. So I think to the extent that you make the case that you basically say that in your paper and do your meta-analysis, that'll probably go a long way. I don't see as many people doing it now as I did a year or two ago. Okay, so data archiving. So data archiving and sharing, yeah, it's required now for all papers submitted to JCR. And data sharing is not required. I think at some other journals it might be required. JCR, it's still your data. So it's not like somebody can just click on it and go get your data. They have to get approval from the journal, and we're not really hep on giving them that. But if some issue comes up, then we have to be able to get the data. And then Qualtrics, I would encourage you to share your data, your Qualtrics. If you're doing online studies and using Qualtrics, or online study using anything, most people use Qualtrics these days. Make sure that all data sets are shared amongst the co-authors, because one thing we've learned is that in these retractions that we've had to deal with, that didn't happen. And so they depended on one co-author to do all the analysis. Well, if you got, it's kind of like you read about these embezzlements. It's usually some controller that, didn't have financial controls in place, and they were able to do what they wanted and write checks to themselves. This is the same thing. If one co-author is the only one who has access to the data and is doing all the analysis, that opens the potential for them to do things they probably shouldn't. Not that very many people do, because I don't think they do it very often, but it's just prudent as a co-author to make sure you have access to the data. Does that mean you have to go through it with a fine-tooth comb? I don't know, I'm more prone to want to do it now after what I've seen the last year or two. But I think just knowing that everybody and all the other co-authors have access to the paper or to the data is going to lessen the likelihood that somebody's going to do something they shouldn't, data integrity wise. And frankly, if a retraction hits, and you can say, with the data collection paragraph that we have, well, I didn't have access to it, you still have a reputational hit as a co-author. So you really behooves us as a community of scholars to make sure that we, do our part in controlling this sort of bad behavior. So it doesn't happen much, but when it does, it has a big negative effect on the whole field. Let's see, so get off my soapbox there. So in terms of what we look for at JCR, the term body of evidence comes up a lot, at least by the editors, because we're trying to look across the corpus of the studies that you ran and not get down in the weeds and say, oh, nitpick apart every study or paper is rejected. Some reviewers will do that. I'm sure most people on the call have had that happen to them more than once. So we try to look at the corpus and what's the body of evidence? Is it compelling? Is it triangulating around dependable, reliable results, in plural. So how do you create a convincing body of evidence? Well, one way is a multi-method approach. We already talked about that. Another way is just vary the paradigm. And what by vary the paradigm, I mean there's an experiment, and then we just barely tweak that. I mentioned this earlier, barely tweak that experiment, and it seems kind of like a stylized paradigm. It's not really analogous to what consumers would really do. And approach that particular problem you're looking at. That's not going to be very convincing. So the more you can vary the paradigm a bit in the context, that's great. Now, having said vary the context, I mean, vary it from, at least have some different product categories across the studies. I've tended to take that too far as an author. So we had a paper where we showed a particular phenomenon in restaurant kind of a context where people are making sequential orders of their food. And then we also showed it in an online context where people are writing sequential reviews, where you go into Yelp and you write a restaurant review and you can see the last two reviews that were for you. I thought that was really compelling because they're really different contexts. It's the same general effect obtains. Reviewers thought they were too different. So don't push that too far, be my advice. And then I also mentioned this earlier, within and between study robustness. So we've talked about between study robustness. We just now did it when we talked about varying the paradigm. So that's between study robustness. But within study robustness, I think we could do more of that as a field, and they do it a lot. You have to do it a lot if you're a modeler. So if you have a secondary data set, you have to do all these robustness checks, okay? And in CB, we are starting to embrace the idea of robustness checks. And actually, I see it coming up in reviews a lot now. Whereas, if you have, like, do your results hold if you put control variables in there? And is those same results obtained if you take those controls out? Do the results obtained if you leave your exclusions in there, people you've tried to drop, versus if you leave them out? To the extent that the results hold up, various ways of cutting it. We used to call that a sensitivity analysis. Now it's called a robustness check. That's compelling. That's more convincing. So what I'm saying here is think in terms of robustness across the studies and also within a study. Okay? And reviewers will help you on the within study robustness. They'll say, well, why don't you look at it if you do this or that, or drop this item from one of the DVs or the manipulation check and see if the result, the mediator or what have you, see if the results hold. That's a robustness check. That's not a bad thing. So let's report it. Let's treat it like a robustness check and report it in a footnote in the paper. That'll only help increase the sense of confidence in your findings. So we're seeing a big expansion in the web appendices. So, you know, my advice here would be think of the web appendix as your friend, in that due to the transparency guidelines that we have at JCR, and really more journals have those, we want to see your materials. We want to see this, you know, what was the procedure that each participant went through, and also detail on the analysis in terms of if you had repeated measures. So in the web appendix, you can report results for each of those measures versus, you know, bogging down the text with all that stuff, and report your correlation matrices. All this level of detail can be in a web appendix. And some of your studies these days end up going in a web appendix. And you say, well, nobody looks at a web appendix. Well, people who are interested in following up your research certainly will look at the web appendix. So don't be afraid to rely on web appendices heavily when you're submitting to any journal, JCR included. And I already mentioned the transparency. We really want detail in describing what you did in your studies. Like if I'm a participant, what happens to me in that study, and then the reporting the results, so the statistical report out. Okay, means by condition, just basic stuff, means by condition and effect sizes that you know, people still don't report, and so we have to keep pestering them to do that. So that's the second phase. So do we have any questions on that? And then we'll have phase 3, and then it'll be open up to this section isn't very long, this next section.
Okay, I can wait here for any question you can send by there. If anyone want to write your questions in Portuguese, you can send me, and I can try to translate and explain to Professor Inman. Professor Paulo, do you want to say something?
Yeah. Just one question that you raised on your presentation about transparency, integrity of all the research process. There's the report and the first part where you register all your procedures and all the ways you collect the data, and the other side you have all the data collected, but maybe there's some issues. We are facing something like this now about in between these two parts, which is the collection per se, how it is collected, and maybe some data manipulation between these two parts. Do you have some thoughts about how we not control exactly, but how we try to minimize the effects of this data manipulation?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's. I mean, you collect data for an experiment, and it comes into Qualtrics, and it's just this dump of data in Qualtrics. And then you export it in an Excel file, a CSV file, and then you start analyzing it. And yeah, you're going to have to clean it up, and that's where these manipulations can happen. And it's appropriate that they do happen, because you're adding things, adding items together, you know, creating your scales and what have you. I mean, I think that there's potential for something, but that's why you want all the co-authors to be on board with what's happening. I've never really seen, you know, in one of these issues that we've had to deal with, that level of, you know, subtle manipulation. You know, we took measures and dropped measures. The field's getting more and more accepting for that, as long as you report it. Let's say you took, you know, 5 measures on affect and you only report, you know, 3 of them. Well, as long as you say you took 5 and you have a reason to drop in 2, I think the field is more accepting of that. It's very accepting of it, actually. So I wouldn't worry about that. It's when it's if you ran like a 2x3 study and you drop one of the conditions to make it a 2x2 so you can get the results to turn out. People used to do that. And now that's not I mean, it never was a great thing, but now if that'll get your paper rejected if people see you did that. So, I mean, those are kind of, there's manipulations and then there's really bad manipulations. And so the JCR and the other journals just don't really have the resources to dig in and try to sort out which from which. We're just relying on, hopefully this data, having to report your data, make it available for reviewers. If somebody has an issue, they can go in and look. But, we're not paying people to do this. So I don't think that's going to be the solution. That's why I think we need to really focus on the stuff that's getting through. We just can't really bring scrutiny to every paper. And I think that's probably where the field will end up, but it's expensive. So luckily it's not our team's problem to deal with. And maybe at some point, probably at some point we'll have, there are algorithms out there. There's stat check we've used to make sure the statistics that are reported are the statistics that are, the p-values match up with the degrees of freedom. That's pretty rudimentary. We'll see, and someday we'll see AI, and we'll see algorithms going through your data and doing forensic analysis on it, but that's years down the road. So that's a long-winded response.
Okay, thank you. There's probably another question, Emilio. Your mic is closed.
Oh, sorry. Do you have any other question? No, I have one from the chat. Okay, Professor Inman, Ana Claudia asked me to ask you if it could be possible to explain again about the dependent variable in the mediator, the part that explained the measure of the order of measurement concerning the DV, the mediator.
Oh, well,
what is the main concern about that?
The main concern is, and if I had, the problem is I'm left-handed. If I start writing on this thing with the note, it's just now you're gonna be able to read it. But because I use the mouse right-handed. So the main concern is that if I've got my manipulations, so I've got an X variable I'm manipulating, and then let's go this way, and then it's I'm predicting there's a mediator, and then I've got my dependent variable. And so that's my model, and that's what I'm trying to test. And so I've got measures of the mediator and my dependent variable. I'm going to manipulate that X. And so there's a concern that if I measure the mediator before the mediator might reinforce the power of the manipulation and drive that dependent variable to turn out the way I predict. Whereas if I do the X, if I manipulate my X, measure my dependent variable right after the manipulation, and then do the mediator, if it works out, that seems more compelling. But I've heard people argue it the opposite way. And so that's why I say the best thing to do is counterbalance the order. But that, like I said, that's expensive to do. And especially it's tricky if the order turns out to matter. So that's why I think right now the field leans towards taking that dependent variable measurement as soon after the manipulation as you can, and not have intervening measures and things of that nature. So that's why. But let's say you did it. Let's say though, in terms of robustness again. So we talked about robustness. Let's say study 1, we did it the way I'm saying. Study 2, we do it the way I'm saying. Study 3, we do it the other way, and it still turns out about the same. Then some reviewer probably say, why'd you change it in study 3? Well, you have to write in study 3, we did this because we want to show robustness. So that's the nice thing. And I think people underutilize that as an author, that you're basically going to weave together this tapestry of studies into this body of evidence. So think about strategically what role I want those studies to play. And we tend to think simplistically that one study is going to demonstrate the main effect, and maybe a study or two will demonstrate some mediation, and then we'll have a study or two that do moderation, and somewhere along the way in there, we'll have, you know, incentive compatible designs. So yeah, those are all ingredients, but how are these going to play out in a way that at the end of the day demonstrates support for your, or at least tests your conceptualization in a way that demonstrates internal and external validity. That's kind of what we're shooting for as authors.
Okay. Professor, thank you very much. I think you can continue because we have just more 32 minutes to finish the session.
Well,
so you can have another part, and you can return for the questions, because I think that in the end you have more discussion.
Great. Okay.
All right.
Super. So just some general, what I would call secrets. They're not necessarily secrets, but just some things I think are useful insights that I've learned that's going to help me as an author when I'm done with JCR. So one is that JCR, and really JCR especially, like I said, it's much broader than people think. I mean, people think of JCR that it's got to have, you know, it's all this experimental stuff and it's all psychology. And that's true to a certain extent, but, you know, they've published papers. We just published one that we inherited from the other team about, it was all about smoking data. And so did the advertising rules change, you know, cause a generation of smokers? And there wasn't any experiments in that. And so there are broader papers in the journal than we think of as in a knee-jerk reaction. One thing we do look for at JCR, so having said what I just said, that's kind of an exception. The reviewers at JCR really look at, the conceptual contribution. And so one effective way to demonstrate a conceptual contribution is through a moderation and boundary effects. And so that's kind of your silver bullet at JCR for conceptual contribution is, a moderate, an interesting, conceptually relevant moderator. Because if you're building on somebody else's theory, well, most base theories kind of have the X and the mediator and the Y. So it's hard to, maybe you're going to create a new mediator, but then you're going to have to control for the past mediators that other people have proposed, and that gets to be challenging. But a lot of our submissions do actually try to do that. So that's why moderators are your friend in terms of demonstrating conceptual contribution. And then the practical. So our team's really pushing as much on the practical too. Is that at the end of the day, who cares? Who cares about your findings? So you really have to think about that. Does it have marketing implications? Great, that's good. Doesn't have to have marketing implications though. If there's implications for public policymakers, there's implications for actually consumers. They can do a better job of managing their weight or what have you. The consumer relevant practical contributions and the public policy ones tend to go hand in hand. And then the firms, that's great if there's something for the firms too, but that doesn't have to be the case. Whereas at JM and JMR, that does have to be the case. JCR, we've really pushed the reviewers to back away from this. You've got to have a unique explanation for every phenomenon that's in the paper. And I think everybody gets it now, because as a field, consumers are pretty complicated. And most of the studies we're going to do, there could be other factors that are in play. And we can't control for every potential factor that could possibly be in play. So we have to accept that many of our phenomena are multiply determined, and that's okay. I mean, I think that's okay. The rest of the team thinks that's okay. The new team may not think that's okay. I think they do, but right now you're okay with that kind of thing. So, and I think most of the reviewers and AEs are on board with that. So I think that's been a change we've been able to, affect in the field. So hopefully it'll stick. I already said this, external validity and robustness are very important. Let's see, wait a minute. think I screwed this up. Oh yeah, so let's go back up. So the preponderance of evidence, point up above where it says it's still okay to use MTurk. I covered that earlier because there was a rumor floating around that JCR doesn't like MTurk. That's not true. And then field studies, jumping down, field studies and managerial takeaways, not required, like I just said. And then we still are very open to methodological papers and conceptual papers. We don't get very many, but we have gotten some. And actually, I think one is already through the process. And we've got a couple of methodological papers that are working their way through right now. So, I mean, those are harder to write. The conceptual papers are harder to write, but they can have a big impact when they get through. So in terms of second secret, so these are the common issues. I mean, this is kind of a mental meta-analysis of what tends to come up across the review teams that I've had to write a decision letter for. You know, I've written, what, 300 of them now so far? No, that's not true. 2,000, so my share of like 500 so far I've had to write. Gotta do about 25%. So one big thing is right up front, you've got to clearly describe what is the new news. What is the white space, the gap in the literature that you're trying to fill with your paper compared to other people who have worked in this space. So if you think of it as a perceptual map, you know, and you have points for all the other papers that are in whatever the dimensions are, conceptual space there, there's some white space. So you say, I'm going in that white space there. Well, that's good. So there's white space, but then you also have to describe why that's important white space to fill. And if it's like, it's so obvious that, you know, it's going to turn out that we don't need to be filling it with research, showing it, then that's going to be bad. Or if it's something that's really super hard to do. So, but that's just argue that white space. And probably the first 2 pages of the paper, really hit that hard. And so then the next piece is conceptualization. And frankly, the first part doesn't come up. That first one about positioning doesn't come up that much. But the contribution, the incremental contribution notion is going to be something that's an assessment across the conceptual and the practical parts of the paper. But then in terms of conceptualization, this comes up in almost every single paper. You know, the term construct clarity, you really have to define your constructs really clearly early on in the paper. And I've had the same thing happen. It's like you work so much on a paper, you just know it too well, and you just have this general understanding of the constructs and how they're supposed to work with each other, and you kind of lose sight of the fact that it's not communicated as well in the paper. And that's just got to be something you do. Maybe present it at a workshop or something, just to people who aren't as familiar, so they'll push you maybe on the construct clarity. And then the interrelationships. I mean, you got X1 and X2, and you got a mediator there. You know, why are they working the way they're working, interrelating with each other? And that's, we call it the nomological network. So that's got to be really, really clear. Okay. Third thing, then we move on. So that's the front end of the paper. Now we're on to the empirical body of evidence. So these are things that come up a lot. One is transparency. If the reviewers are asking for details on the study, you're kind of asking them to give you the benefit of the doubt. You're asking them to say, oh, well, it looks like it's pretty good, but I'm not quite sure. They may give you the benefit of the doubt. On the other hand, they may say, I'm not sure, that's uncertain. I'm going to be like the stock market and really not like uncertainty. I'm going to give you a rejection. So that's, so the more transparent you can be, the better. My advice would be to follow the transparency guidelines when you submit your paper. And the second one that comes up, and this is bad when this happens, it's got to be clear to the reviewers how the constructs that you talked about in the conceptualization map on to the variables, your manipulations you're doing in your experiments. That is really critical, because That's the variable operationalization. If that's not clear or that's not convincing, then you're going to hear people say, well, your front end isn't mapping on to your studies, and that's usually grounds for rejection when that happens. So really think long and hard about your operationalization. And I talk a lot about that in one of those videos that I refer you to in that link. And then we already talked about the robustness and generalizability. I mean, I'm just keep repeating this because it's so important. And then need to balance internal and external validity. And I've talked about consequential dependent variables and incentive compatible designs. Those tend to go hand in hand. If you've got consequential dependent variable, then you've got an incentive compatible design, and vice versa. We're trying to get beyond just having people, clicking a box on a scale, would definitely buy, would definitely not buy, purchase intention, single item purchase intention scale. If you look back over the last few years, you used to see a lot of that in JCR. And we still do, but we also want studies in the papers that have some, real consequential dependent variables. And then finally, and I've touched on this, implications for the key stakeholders. I mean, who cares about what you just have found in your research? One is, what's their implications for researchers? What is the conceptual implications for people who want to follow in your footsteps and direction for future research? And then also, what are the practical takeaways for, for key stakeholder groups that are listed here? And I've already mentioned before, consumers, public policymakers, and maybe firms. So number 3, this is the last slide. So this is really a secret because JCR, probably more so than most journals, isn't a zero-sum game. I mean, I was really surprised when I asked what's our contract with Oxford for page number, for page count, and how many are we filling? And we're filling about half of our contracted page count. So it's not that we are short of pages. It's not like we have to be really tough because we don't have we're filling all our pages. We're not. So we need more good papers. So please, everybody out there, I appeal to you, submit your best consumer-focused research to JCR. You're going to get turned around in 60 to 90 days, so why not? And if you're interested in more information, I got this long convoluted link here that I got when I made the box videos open for anybody to view those videos. But I copied that and pasted it into the chat. So if you're interested in watching that, it's me and Meg and Amna and Linda basically talking through. We deconstruct a paper and we each took a part of it. And I think all told, you're looking at probably 40 minutes across all 4 videos. I think half of it was me because I tend to be too long-winded. If you find those useful, great. I can only leave those up for a little while. So I didn't tell Linda and Amna and Meg I'm doing this, so I don't want to leave it up there because they'll get mad if they found out that I've left up there for the whole world to see for a very long time. Because they're very self-conscious of their stage presence, but I thought they did a great job. So, and I think you will too. So that's all I have. Let's open it up for questions. Let me get this out of, I'll stop share. There we go.
Okay. Professor Inman, thank you very much for your presentation. Your talk was very good, very nice. We already received here from Professor Cristiani. She said that she loved Jeff's secrets.
Yeah, there's no guarantees though. Yeah, but yeah, hopefully they'll be useful. They'll be useful for me. They're already useful. I'm using them in my own, like I said, my own papers.
It's good to address some kind of how to organize our ideas and to put in the paper. It's very important to be easy to review process, to pass for the review process. Good. So I'd like to ask people, we have more 18 minutes, so you can have some discussion, some questions, some doubts you have. And when you are maybe writing your questions, I will say, Professor Inman, that when I'm teaching my marketing class, I have been showing some JCR articles, and I have provide students, look, different studies in the articles. In the past, we have 4, 5 studies, maybe one or another article with 7 studies, but more recently, in the last 6, 7 years, the articles in JCR, they have 7, 10, 14 studies. So I'd like to ask you, that's the kind of tendency, it's very, because this is very hard to do so many studies, because you have to take time, you need some kind of very strong financial support. So sometimes we have a good research, but we have done some few studies, 4 or 5, something that had concluded that the idea about the research, the main construct and the effects that we have provided. But wow, to develop 12, 14 studies with 2,000, 4,000 participants, and I don't know, it's very hard. How do you say that?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. So I don't think we need 14 studies. Typically it's a sign. If you can write up 14 studies in a 50-page, 60-page paper, then those are pretty simple studies. And you're not varying the paradigm very much. And so based on what I said earlier, we don't have a certain minimum of studies. I think more than one, typically more than one. Although my very first paper at JCR, I had
a minimum
study in there. Yeah. So, but that was maybe the last one that got through. So I'd say, 3 to 5 is critical mass. But if you're finding yourself, running studies and it's 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, those are
1J.
not very different, and you don't need all those. So kick a bunch of those to the web appendix, or don't even do them in the first place. A solid corpus of studies, you want your studies to be meaty. At least here's my sense. You want your studies to be meaty enough that it takes a few pages to describe them and write them up. And you've only got so many pages of text, typically 40 pages or so for the whole paper. The text part, not counting references and whatnot. And so, we shouldn't be having 14 study papers. So I'd like to think those are more the exception than the rule. But, to be honest, I haven't looked through the issues we've published to see what the average number of studies is. But the ones I tend to keep for myself, I don't even look at the number of studies, but I'd say 3 to 5, maybe 6 sometimes.
Yeah, sure. I saw about the web appendices. When you submit the article, we just submit it as appendices, and the journal later decide which appendix will be to the web appendices, right? Yes,
there'll be you'll submit your cover letter, and then you submit your paper, and then there's a piece to submit the web appendix, and people to submit that as a separate file. And
separate file, okay.
A separate file, and reviewers look at that.
All right.
And they really do look at that. So you might as well do that. There's another tip I'll give everybody. So I had a paper today, I was laying here, that had like 15 pages of references. And the JCR style sheet says you have to double space all the references. So it just blows it up. Just blows up the references. So JM and JMR, my whole career, I've ignored that. And I single space the references within a reference, and then I double space between. And it's amazing how many pages it takes out when you do that. And nobody ever says, hey, you didn't follow our format for the references, you need to do all this. But when the reviewers pull it up and they print it out and it's 10 pages shorter, that at the margin works in your favor, in my opinion. That's a small thing, but I've never had people issue an issue with the journal complaining about that. So just FYI.
Okay.
It's very small, but I don't know. I just drive
Yeah, you have to understand all these details, because people want to see the procedure is very important, because they want to know, they have to see the rigor of the research. So if you are not very clear about the procedures, how we collect, how we made the manipulation, the stimulus for the research. So sometimes it's difficult to write so many things. We need some figures, so that's important.
One other thing I'll mention, and it's come up more often than I would have thought, is that I don't think as a field, people understand what the editor expects the reviewer notes to look like. And it seems like people from these kind of clubby schools are all kind of colluding and they get it, but then there's people that are not as tied in. And so what happens is when the editor writes a letter, you're going to get an editor letter, you're going to get an AE report, and you're going to get all these reviews. So what the editor expects to see when he comes back and the reviewer notes, they expect to see a separate thing to the editor that says, that can be part of all the other reviewer notes, but says, the editor, you said these 4 things, here's what we did. And then do the same thing for the AE, and then you can, summarize the reviewers a bit. But it's been surprising how many times I've pulled up the revision and they didn't have a letter or didn't in their reviewer notes say what they did in response to what I said. And I'm the one making the decision. It just seems common sense you would do that. But, I'm just throwing it out there now for all you guys that you want to make sure to make it clear to the editor that you heard what they said and here's how we tried to address it. I don't think the editor expects you to do everything because maybe the editor was wrong, but they want you to address it.
Yes, it's possible. I'd like to say that many professors here sent they congratulate you, they thank you, excellent webinar, thank you. Congrats, Professor Inman, good tip. And the circuits are very useful. So many people thank you for
I want to give in one more tip. One last tip. So, and I'm not saying I don't expect people to be contacting me about this tip. But when you're getting started, and even getting started, like if you've never published in a JCR, JMR level of a journal, there's a certain way. Not a certain way, but there's latitude. But there's just something to knowing what it takes to position a paper and structure the conceptual part and structure the studies that will fit with what that journal expects to see. And it really would help if you team up with somebody on your author team that's done that before. Because if everybody on the team has never published in, I'm just going to throw out JMR and JCR because they look a lot, the CD part is very similar. Then it's just tough. It's saying we have the blind leading the blind. So that's why as a doctoral student, we team up with, senior people, and that's good. But let's say you're an assistant professor and you don't have, maybe you're chair to ever did publish in those level of journals and you want to because you're at a school that really expects that. Reach out to somebody else in the community and see if they're interested in collaborating with you, know? Right. Don't reach out to me. No. Because I've got a lot. But I'm just saying, it's really, really helpful. And then once you've kind of, it's going to teach a person to fish, you feed them for a lifetime. Once you've been through it and you say, oh, that's how they did that, it just it does a lot of demystification for you. So I would just throw that out there as a suggestion.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. We have received from many international professors some kind of discussion about that it's very important in the beginning. If it's your first time in this level of journal, you need some kind of a co-author that have the experience to help you to understand your first steps, and maybe in the next moment, in the second article, in other articles, you can do yourself. But in the beginning, it's good, and you have this.
Exactly. And so but on the other hand, I was the first starting, I kind of had that intuition. And so the problem is if you ask Professor X to be a co-author on your paper, and then turns out that Professor X doesn't really do it's always his that does it. So his share of the work, then you're stuck with Professor X, because once you've asked somebody to be on the paper, you're stuck with them. So, think ask people like, oh, is Professor X a good co-author from what you know? Because once you've asked Professor X to be on your paper, you're not getting rid of them, and they just become a burden. So I hope I'm not Professor X. By the way, I think I try to be a good co-author, but it's really important to pick good co-authors that really work together and try to get the job done. So
yes, I really appreciate it. It was very good. Thank you very much, Professor. Professor Paulo, would you like to say something, please?
Yeah, just one consideration. We have not a huge group, but it's a group of researchers that do their research on CCT and qualitative procedures and so on. And there's a small part of journal consumer research that gets this kind of papers. I'm not a researcher like this, but what are the main things or issues that you see with the people that submit papers on this kind of configuration?
Well, like I said, I think I mentioned earlier, Linda Price handles all those, because it's a much different nature of the review process for the CCT papers, because they typically don't have a lot of data. It's typically more based on depth interviews and participant observer sometimes. And there's just a different skill set that it takes to write such a paper and to critique such a paper. And so that's why we were really glad to have Linda on our team, because she's handled all those. One thing I will say is that she's told us it's really tough to get those papers through, and they tend to go through a lot of rounds. And they, in the community, it's not like a community that says, oh yeah, we want more of that, we're going to accept all the CCT stuff. I mean, she says they're really tough on the CCT papers. And so we get about probably 10 to 15% of the submissions are CCT. And I'd say probably 10 to 15% of the articles that come out are CCT. So it's not like they're getting an advantage or disadvantage. But I would recommend you watch Linda's video, because she talks about that. That was the point of that video. And it's like a 10-minute video, so it's not going to answer all your questions, but
Yeah, sure.
it'll get you started.
Yeah, but it's a good tip, because we have some research from CCT that's going to help them a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's important, right? Because that's an important part of the community. And so we had me, I can do more of the, the empirical stuff, then the multi-method stuff, and then Amna and Meg, they're really kind of the classic experimentalists, and then Linda's more of a CCT who also does multi-method stuff. So, I mean, that's why I think we have a solid team in terms of breadth. And I think the new team is that way too. They've got Andrew Stephen, who can do the empirical, and they've got Marcus Giesler, who can do the CCT.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Oh,
I think we can finish.
There's a question.
There's a question there.
There is a question. Let me see here. Just arrived. Okay. Yeah, from Sandy Heinhardt, that's the last question. We have just 4 minutes. What about trend topics? Can you say something that JCR is looking for right now?
Oh,
Yes.
That's a great question, and everybody always wants to know that. I don't think there's a particular trend that we're looking for per se. There's a trend that we see, and one of those is word of mouth, like online kind of stuff, which is great. I mean, we don't get a whole lot of that. I mean, we're getting some though, and so how do consumers react to online content? So we're getting some of that. But in terms of something that we're specifically looking for, we're just looking for good papers. I think, papers that, if we get if you're working on something and you're using the fishbine model, that's probably not, as a field, we tend to like new things, which I like about CB, because there's always something new. So look in the real world, what are the new hot topics? Well, it's, technology, consumer technology interaction. You're going to see more of that. We'd like to see more of that. We don't get very much of that. But there's a whole field of human computer interaction, and our little slice of it would be consumer technology interaction. That's what I like to say. And we just don't get much of that. So it's I think we're going to get more COVID. I mean, there's these timely topics that are important, and so I think we're seeing more stuff on consumer well-being. The problem is we're seeing a lot of stuff on that. So we want to see more stuff on that. I don't know. You know, it's the challenge as an author is like, you know, the ACR conference was online. So I hope a lot of you were able to go to that. Like we're going to this. If my advice to doctoral students and young authors is if you walk into a room at ACR and it's packed with 100 people, you don't want to be working on that topic because there's 100 people that are probably ahead of you on that topic. So don't do that. But most people tend to flock to hot topics. So I would say, you know, just do what you think is best to be, or you're interested in, and go with that, because that's what makes us motivated is, studying what our passions are. And so just let that go. And if you get bad feedback from a journal that's an old topic, then you learn something from that. But don't chase hot topics. Chase things that you're interested in. I mean, if it's something timely, that's good, because it's probably going to be hot if it's timely, especially if you can see a trend coming. Like I can tell you right now, a trend's coming in the U.S. at least, where we'll be seeing more interest in racial, ethnic effects. But I think the challenge there is going to be what's the theory. But we went as a field, we're thinking more in terms of demographics as moderators, and in the past we hadn't really thought of them that way. But gender is a classic example of a good moderator in some cases. Because of agency community theory, there's not a lot of theories out there on gender, on ethnic moderators. But I hope that helps. But don't be discouraged if you're the only one in a session, because maybe that's a good thing.
A lot. Thank you very much. You help a lot. I really appreciate it. I'd like to thank you again, and thank all participants. I will let Professor Paul Prado conclude and finish this section. It was very good. I hope to see you on live in the future.
I wish we were actually seeing each other down in Brazil and not thousands of miles apart. So someday I'd really like to get to Brazil. I've never been there.
Great. You have our contact, so you can keep in contact with us. Okay. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks everybody for attending the session. Hope it was helpful.
Okay, thank you again, Professor Inman, for accepting our invitation. And we hope in the next opportunity. So the next coordinator of our division will be Professor Emilio. So there'll be probably some other opportunities to have you here in person, not just online. So great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for insightful thoughts, and I think you'll help us a lot with your presentation.
Send your best work to JCR. Let's close with that comment.
Okay. We hope so.
Yeah, it's a dream. We try.
Okay.
We hope to be accepted there. So thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the audience. And again, that's one of our biggest activity in the conference. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you all. Have a good evening. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.